Great, everyone. Welcome. First of all, I want to make sure that as we are logging on today, let me know if you can see when I'm sharing the screen here like this. I won't be able to necessarily see you in there. I'm going to maybe try stop sharing here for a second, see if I can share that again. Oh. Got it. All right. I can see you now. All right, perfect. So, folks, if you're just now joining, I want to thank you for giving up a little bit of your Sunday. We are recording this so that if you want to revisit it, and I can also share the slide decks with you if it is something that you would like me to do after the fact. I want to open by asking you why you think we are having this meeting or why it's important to be considering what the AIA, the Aerospace and Innovation Academy, and the Wolfpack, what our stance is for the use of AI. Any ideas? You can just raise your hand or holler out. It doesn't matter to me. Okay, looks like Sophia. Why do you think that is?
Um, well, AI is definitely a disruptive technology in a way.
Oh, say that again.
It's very disruptive.
In what way?
It's changed a lot of things, like um how things need to be checked for plagiarism, uh, and how people can pay artists less,
Well, those are all some
which
definitely
makes me mad.
specific ideas that could be talked about with it, isn't it? When you say disruptive, disruptive sometimes sounds to us like it can be a negative thing, right? Like nobody wants the disruptive student in their
Yeah, I
classroom.
think it's negative.
It sounds negative, right?
It is negative. This
Well,
whole idea is negative. I hate this stuff.
oh,
I hate this
okay.
whole AI stuff. It makes me so
I
mad.
I hear you, but we're not here to debate it today.
I know,
It's
I know.
in a way. So what I do want to share though is that oftentimes you may have heard Mr. Simmons talk about disruptive in a good way. The idea that CubeSats is, say, a disruptive educational tool. So when something's disruptive, it doesn't have to be bad, even though we may be coming at it from a mindset that is. And I'm one of those, Sophia, like you, who is way more suspicious about it than I am necessarily a proponent. But I do recognize that it is not going away. And at the same time, many of our students today are faced with the challenges of do they put in the time on the front end to learn something, or do they use AI in ways that, might help them cut some corners? So today
Yeah.
we want to talk about the ethical use of that. So besides Sophia, who else thinks we might be having to have this conversation, or why would we be having to have this conversation? Teddy?
I just wanted to say, kind of like Sophia was saying, it's like disruptive and it's a tool that I think it's important to be able to use right. Like I know I don't know how to use it right. I've always been taught like AI is bad, AI is bad.
Right,
But
right.
my mom was like a graded papers for Palm Beach State College for a while. And
Uh-huh.
so yeah, so I just want to, it would be nice to have like a new tool under my belt that'll make things run
Sure.
smoother.
And, I'm glad that you mentioned your mom who works at a school. She probably has a policy that their school is adopting. And many of you may be finding that there are some kind of expectations that maybe your teachers have in the classroom about what is or is not acceptable. And at the same time, districts and schools and organizations adopt those policies so that they can kind of better define because it is nebulous, right? It's really hard to tell what constitutes ethical use of AI, and it may be different for different organizations. So we wanted to establish that for our group as we have students who are going to be writing a lot and presenting these higher level topics. And because the nature is it's very difficult already for middle school students and high school students to kind of even wrap their heads around these concepts. The inclination to perhaps use it incorrectly may be hard to fight. So that's why I wanted to meet with you all today as I work with you primarily on your abstracts and your papers so that we can understand how we might be able to use this tool in a way that is ethical. So first, I want to start talking about what I mean by ethical, right? And as you can see it, as my definition here states, that it's related to moral principles. Now, this can be a little bit tricky because of the fact that overall, how we define morals or whose morals we're talking about, we all know that if you're a debater, like that can be tricky ground. My morals may be different from yours. But the subject of ethics deals with those kinds of principles, whether something's right or wrong. So we need to define what that's going to look like for us when it comes to your papers. What is right for a Wolfpack member, and maybe what is right for your teacher at school or your parents' organization? All of those may differ. For example, let's look at this first question. Would we say that cheating or plagiarism or cutting and pasting in general when we're doing is ethical? Most of us are
No.
going to go ahead and answer how. You can just shake your heads. Yeah, no, of course not, right? And yet, I still have students, I don't know if you know anybody who does this, who assumes that when they use Grammarly to check their documents and it edits it to make it better, oftentimes that piece of writing is no longer their original writing anymore, right? And so in their minds, they're not doing anything purposeful. They're just checking or improving their work. So it is a very fine line to determine how we define even plagiarism, right? The idea if when I have a chat GPT prompt tell me how I can improve my first paragraph, if I just accept the corrections on it without actually doing it myself, is that cutting and pasting? Is it plagiarism? You can see it's kind of up in the air for that. So let's look at the second one. What about getting advice or tutoring to help you improve? Would that be ethical? I see a few people shaking their heads here with a yes. And that's the stance that I generally take. I use AI. I come from a background where I'm so old that, like we didn't have the internet at all, right? So we had to like use literal books and encyclopedias for our research and things like that. And yet, even in today's day and age, I can acknowledge that I can move a lot faster with the use of AI as far as improving my own work. It's a fine line for students who might not have a background at all in a topic to be able to then go from augmenting or adding on to your own experience or to generating. When I talk to my own students in class, I look at it this way. Did you generate the piece yourself? Or is any of it generated by AI? If it's generated, that is not ethical, whether it's art, images, whatever, without attributing the sources, right? So if it's being generated without attribution, then that is not ethical. That even means, again, I'm going to go back to the Grammarly thing because I know that's a very common one with middle school students where they're just checking their grammar, but in reality, the improvements completely change the content of their paper. All right. So here's some other examples. Obviously, my little guy over to the left, little penguin for my polar loving friends, you can see that it is not ethical to just let chat do it for you, right? Convenient, and I know we're all very busy, and so it's a time saver for sure. But more and more, I've come to realize that you all are at kind of a disadvantage because you live in a world where you can have the answer just like that. But in the process, you're losing the ability to think on your own about how to do it. And while you may know an answer to something, the more you rely on an AI to do the work for you, the less likely you're actually understanding that topic. And Wolfpack members need to fully understand a topic, not just kind of skim across the edges, which is, what chat can do for you. On the other hand, there are some techniques or tips that I believe AI can be helpful for us as Wolfpack students. And that's especially when it comes to maybe understanding a technical paper that I'm trying to research as one of my sources, and it's college level, and I'm really not getting it. Having chat summarize that or having AI and other tools summarize a larger work like that and put it into my vocabulary level, that's helping me to understand. That's augmenting my learning. I'm not going to use that as my paper, but it's helping me to understand so I can write my paper, right? I also like thinking about the use of AI when I have a draft already that I've created, but I want some specific feedback. Now, notice I'm saying specific feedback here, not just, hey, edit my paper. Or, hey, Grammarly, improve this so that it sounds more, it sounds right. Instead, I mean specifically asking it to maybe look at how you can more effectively transition between sentences, or asking how you might incorporate some of your data better. Notice too, I'm going to reiterate this one over and over again, so I apologize for repeating myself. But when you ask and get an answer from AI, you're not cutting and pasting it into your document. You are using some of the suggestions and then continuing to put them in your own words. So there is some work involved. It's not just a matter of moving, cutting and pasting into a document. It really is about thinking through what it is offering you. You may ignore some of the suggestions and you may go with some that you then learn how to do that on your own in the future. Additionally, you might use it to get help to understand a topic that you are finding might be over your head. Let's say you want to do something on mining asteroids, okay? And I'm thinking about this because it happens to be the spun debate topic this year. So I'm working with an international debate group on whether or not we should have some kind of regulation system in place to make sure we're not like utilizing space minerals in a negative way, right? So I may not really understand enough about that. I could certainly just do a quick Google search, but I could actually use something like AI to break that topic down and to give me both the pros and the cons in the argument already, and even help me to understand some future impacts. So instead of having to like read for hours trying to find my direction, chat can help me narrow down that background research in a way that, again, is just helping me understand the topic. So for someone like Sophia, if she had come to me and talked about using I know the name of your principal. That's why I picked you. Hold on. I want to say home and transfer. That's not it. Oh no, I've forgotten the name. Tell me the mathematical thing that we work with again.
The Monte Carlo.
Thank you. Good heavens. How could I have forgotten that? I don't know anything about Monte Carlo, right? I couldn't even remember its name just now. But I could use AI in order to help me understand that before I look at her paper, something along those lines, right? Now, I know some of you are thinking, but it's not always correct. We've been told that. That's why we're afraid of it. It gives us wrong answers. And that can be true. There are times when I've had it generate some questions and like out of a chapter in a book, and they've given me completely, wrong answers. But it is getting better and better. And at least that's why I'm saying you're not claiming its work as your own, but in helping you understand the basics of it, it has gotten a lot better over time and being able to at least give you the basics on that. So before we go further, I want to ask if you have any quick questions, because I want to show you that this is going to be a policy, and this is the policy that we're going to use, and I want to tell you where it came from. But before I go there, any questions at all, just maybe raise a hand in the chat in case I can't see you there. All right, looks like no questions. So that being said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to let you see this policy. In the parts that are highlighted, what I've done is I've tried to make it more in line with the Wolfpack. This is a policy that I blatantly went to the College Board's website. And for those of you who will be in AP or IB classes in your future, this is their current stance on how to use AI specifically for their capstone project. Now, a capstone project is kind of like, if you're from the Green School, it might have been what the Passions Pathway project was. Or if you're at a high school, many of your high schools have requirements where you do a capstone. It means like a culminating project. So for the College Board, they have their own, and this is their specific policy about the use of AI. And so notice it says generative AI tools. Generative can be images, can be text, right? Not just the kind of text model where they're giving answers, but things that are growing as you're talking to it, like learning as it goes, okay? So these tools must be used ethically, responsibly, and intentionally to support learning, not to bypass it. So I know you can read, but I really just think it's important that we look at this as a statement for understanding that many educational organizations are adopting similar policies. So again, it's to support, not to bypass learning. It also says that any performance tasks submitted in AP seminar and AP research, these are classes you might take in high school, And notice how I said for us, any work submitted on our behalf of students as a Wolfpack member, whether it's going to be a logo design, whether it's going to be a space settlement proposition, an abstract, or a paper, it's going to be noted that it must be your own work. And again, while you're permitted to use these tools consistent with the policy of learning, you may not use them outside of that scope. So it says you can use these tools as aids for exploring potential topics of inquiry, initial searches for sources of information, and confirming understanding of a complex text. Now, checking your writing and for grammar and tone. Now, remember, I've cautioned you on this already, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be checking for grammar and tone. But remember that ultimately the work that you submit should not be generated by AI. It should be yours. So how you take the information and you then use it as your own is that fine line. Notice it says students must read primary and secondary sources directly, perform their own analysis and synthesis of evidence, and make their own choices on how to communicate effectively, both in their writing and presentations. I added that about your slides because I'm well aware that now we have AI that can generate your slides as well. And while we can use them after we've come up with our own idea, we are not going to use them to substitute our own learning. And I think that that's the theme I really want you to walk away from today. So going on there as well, in there it says that it's the student's responsibility to engage deeply. That means you have to research, folks. You can't give up the reading. The more we break away from reading full texts, full novels, full articles, the less we understand and the more we are not able to think critically. And I say that as a person myself whose own reading has been affected by my addiction to the phone. But it is a dangerous time when we're no longer reading the actual item itself and we're just getting a summary on it. So we want Wolfpack members to be diligent researchers and readers. And from there, you will build your writing steps and your writing skills. That's why we iterate so many times through the process with me, because you shouldn't be writing a college level style paper already. You shouldn't. You're in middle or high school, right? So it's not expected that the first draft that comes to me is going to be perfect like that. We go through the process to learn. Okay, and then finally here, students must complete, these are checkpoints, that's for AP, but notice here what I mean by that is, for us, we define that as when we give you deadlines to send the abstracts or the papers or whatever it is to us, we go through the editing process part with you, kick it back for edits and so forth. So don't let chat or any AI tool be the substitute for that. And notice I added this bit on the bottom there, right? When you're violating what we are now setting forward, and this may change over time, of course, it's really important to note that we can reserve the right to not submit your paper or to even say we're not going to allow you to submit papers on behalf of the Wolfpack anymore. So and that's unlikely to happen. We know that you all want to know a lot about your topics, and you haven't given us any reason to suspect that there would be a time where you're not researching your own topic. But as an English teacher, I just know that it's important to help provide the guidelines as it continues to improve. Any questions about the policy before we move on? Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we are. Now that we know how to use it ethically, how can we write prompts that are going to be particularly useful? So I have a video clip I'm going to show us in a little bit that one of the biggest problems we have, if you've ever dabbled with AI, and I'm going to use chat most here for this conversation, but sometimes you ask it something and it doesn't really give you what you want. It's because we haven't learned how to really write specific prompts in order to get it to do what we want it to do. And we may have to iterate and go back and forth with chat a few times to get that. Additionally, most students have a tendency to use it for just base stuff, like here's this question, answer this worksheet, and ask a question from the worksheet and they want to know the answer. So they're only looking for black and white information instead of using it for learning. So these tips are ones that I've found to be useful in getting it to generate some of the items that we might be using it for Wolfpack. So first, please give it a role, right? So you want to tell it, who you are. If you are functioning like when I work with debate students, I'm a student Congress debater about to go into a chamber. Please provide some cross-examination questions that I can practice with on this topic. And I might put it in there, right? So you're giving it a role. Notice here in the example that I've listed for you, I say act as if you are a researcher in the field of space debris mitigation. Okay, that was another popular topic we had in last year, how to mitigate space debris, right? So now I'm asking it. I don't want you to come, come at it as though you are pro or con on the side of it. I don't want you to come at me like you are just some random AI. I specifically want you to be a researcher. So it's honing in, it's telling the AI where to kind of focus on the material that it's going to pull up. But I'm also going to tell it the output or the format that I want. And I can even talk to it and tell it about the tone. If I want it to sound like it is, Taylor Swift, I can have it generate an entire report sounding like Taylor Swift, right? So that's the kind of fun stuff behind it. But for our purposes, keeping in line with that same idea of space debris mitigation, I might ask it to list, so that's the output, right? List the 10 most important facts about how debris has been mitigated. And notice I'm giving it some limits as well. I'm asking it to include any new advancements that may be studied. So in other words, not only debris mitigation of the past as I'm trying to understand what's been done, but any new advancements. Now, AI has been criticized in the past by saying that it can't really give you anything current. Well, that too is changing. It is more and more able to draw, maybe not on something that was updated 24 hours ago, but new research that has been published. It's moving at a faster rate. So I can help narrow down my response by putting in those clarifying factors. Notice that I also clarify further with do or don't commands. I can say don't report on any efforts before 2025. So I want to now kind of narrow down my search, which is what you're doing anyway when you're using something like, when you're using Google Scholar, or if you're using Citation Machine or any number of those things to go in and find research. And then you're saying, I don't want it any older than this date. And then finally, notice you may want the information that comes back to you to be coming back for a specific audience. So in this instance, if you're an eighth grader, you might want them not only to give you those top 10 facts, but also to summarize the issue for a student at the eighth grade level. So by doing that, that can further help you understand a really, really complex topic. Or if you have a PDF of a really, really complex topic that's your primary source, and if you're looking to understand it, in some instances, especially with some of the paid versions of chat, you can actually upload that PDF so that it can look at that example and it can summarize that information for you in a level that you can understand. Now, I'm not saying that you do this with everything. I am saying it's difficult for an eighth grade student to not only write like a college student, but sometimes to read the research because they're 18, 20 pages long and it's at a level that's a little bit higher than us. And yes, the Wolfpack expects that you're going to write at that point. So the only way that sometimes you might be able to understand that content is to have it presented to you in an easier to understand format. That is not insulting to your intelligence. It's just a tool. Remember, these are just tools that we're using to as we get more skilled, right? So now we can see at the very bottom that I took all that information and I put it into a prompt. And that's what I would put into chat to generate. Now, if we had more time, I would do it with you. I would put it in there and maybe I can because I may have to iterate several times. What do I mean by iterate? You can just holler it out while I'm trying to copy paste this thing here. What do I mean by iterate?
Do it again over and over again.
Yeah, so like we iterate a lot when I am, oop, it's not going to let me do it easily from here. We iterate a lot when you send a draft into me and I send it back. So I may have to iterate with chat a couple times, right? And I wish, for sake of time, I'm not going to do it because I would have to go out of the slide to copy it. But when I put it in, I may say, oh, okay, I don't like these first three. Can you give me three more? You engage with it to make it more specific for what you're looking for. So these are some popular AI tools that, I've been learning about and you may be familiar with. And some of them are better suited for these tasks. Grammarly, I know it started out as a way, most of us, when we tell our parents, hey, we're just using Grammarly to check our grammar, that's not what it does anymore. It does a lot more. And in fact, teachers who might not be up on what the tools are might just think, oh, okay, yeah, it's just being edited for grammar. But some schools have gone so far as to kind of block it because they know that, it is oftentimes generating the work as well. So just know that all of these are now working in a way that are like learning, right? So when we talk about iterative or generative AI, some just provide text answers, but some, if they can kind of learn as they're going, that's going to be more generative in response. I've been playing around a lot recently with Claude AI, which is like a chat GPT. I find it to be useful in some instances. I like its format and its output a little bit better. And of course, DeepSeek is the new one everyone's talking about because China came out with this one at a fraction of the cost. It is an interesting one too. It adapts, it moves very quickly, um, but it may not have access to, some global things. There are some that work with images as well. And so as you're thinking about images for any of the projects that you may be looking to do for your slides and even the creation of slide templates, Canva has its own like magic maker, which you can, the more specific you are with your prompt, the more likely you can generate the image that you're looking for. And in fact, DALL-E is one that I've had my students look at doing. I liked DALL-E a little bit better than Canva. I found that one to be very realistic. I mean, to the point where it's frightening, right, about how realistic the images look by just kind of putting in a very specific prompt. But I share them with you just because these are ones that, are most familiar. Diffit is not so much an AI as much as it is a tool, and you may or may not be able to have access to it. And let me explain what Diffit is. As a teacher, I can access Diffit and I can change the accessibility levels of a document or an article or a YouTube, channel or something along those lines. And I can adjust the reading level. So if I want to make the reading level more accepted by maybe a lower level student in my class, I can take that document and give different reading levels to different people in the group. You may want to do that if you can access it, and you may be able to find a way around that whole teacher part to see whether or not it can take some of those higher level articles that you have and bring it down to your reading level. It also can change the language. Oftentimes, like for your, if you speak another language as your primary language, it can turn it into that. So that is one. But I believe that chat, as a general rule, can do the same thing. And especially where you can upload a PDF, if you do that, you'll be able to see. There is a search engine. Notice like Google, we know, is a search engine. They have their own Gemini. Every one of the search engines are starting to come up with their own, and they're all kind of very similar now that, chat was kind of the progenitor of that. And it was like a shared access. But there is a video that I have linked at the end that will talk about how to do science research specifically with AI, and it asks you to open it up through Bing so that you have like a double screen where it can like go through multiple pages at once and pull out. I haven't tried that yet, but I wanted to let you know that there are several. Oftentimes I get asked the question, like, well, how do you know? I mean, you can't really prove if it's been generated by AI. And there's some truth to that. I mean, to some extent, it's harder and harder for teachers to determine because it's not exactly plagiarism where I'm cutting and pasting, but it is generated by somebody else, which means it's not very ethical. Most often, we see the same kind of openings or vocabulary that students aren't familiar with, or when I ask them questions about it, they can't speak articulately on it. So that's the thing to know. Oftentimes prompts tend to open with this for their hook. Imagine a world. And like, that's just like a, a key to us as teachers that is generated by AI, right? So just know that we do have ways of determining it. But the most important part for me to tell you is if you're presenting at a conference and you get asked questions, but you cannot speak on something you wrote about, people are going to assume that you did not write that paper. And you all, as young students, already have that against you. Many adults can't fathom how you got up to speak at a conference that is for adults, right? So they're already thinking that either, your parents were helping you, or Mr. Simmons or I were helping you. You already kind of have that to fight against. So you don't want to make it worse by just generating something that is, PhD material, but you cannot defend it. There's nothing worse. All right, we're almost to the end here before we kind of open it up for any questions, but I wanted to kind of break it down for you here into really some ideas that I think would be helpful for you, kind of reviewing what we've already mentioned. And so use it to research, to polish your work, to extend your work. If somebody has been doing a topic 1 year, like the Monte Carlo method, and Sophia wanted to figure out how can she take this her paper a step further, she could plug her own paper in there and say, I'd like to come up with some extensions on this idea to continue my work. So I want to run through these list of suggestions with you very quickly. So if you know you want to write an abstract, but you don't know where to begin, consider using AI to help you generate a list of potential topics. I know Mr. Simmons has suggested that to some of you before, but maybe you hone it in a little bit. You're like, I liked engineering, and I'm working with students who are building payloads, but I really don't know what they are, and they've done them on X, Y, and Z before. I'd like to do a payload related to this and see if it can generate some specific ideas that way. The more specific you are in your prompt, the better that can be, right? You might ask it to create an outline. Once you've had an abstract or a paper accepted, it might help spell out the categories, especially if you're doing the IAC template that most of us are using. You can even kind of put that in and ask it to help you outline your ideas. But I even have outlining your abstract there, because if you've never written an abstract before, sometimes it's important to know what's going to come first, and it can kind of help you with that as well. Remember, it's an outline. Your job is to write it once you see that. And you may change it. You don't have to accept what it gives you. You, of course, can iterate with it yourself. You might use it to summarize a current body of research. Many times, Mr. Simmons will talk to you about knowing what's already out there. And it's kind of like what we call a lit review, a literature review, right? So teachers call it that. Because if you have looked at all the literature that's out there, and you're kind of, this is what this group has said, and this is what this group has said, how can you add to a body of research? You have to know what's already been out there. So if you're young and you kind of think, oh, I have this great idea, unless you've really researched it, you don't know if it's already been done or why it hasn't been done. So using something like AI to help you really summarize the current body, meaning all of the work that's been done in a field. And then my favorite part of this part is to suggest gaps. Why do you think I would want it to suggest gaps in that research? Who can holler out that answer? Everybody's gone over to AI to start tabulating. I'm going to wait for an answer for this. Why do you think it is important that you know the gaps in the research?
So you can like fill in the gap.
Okay, so what do I mean by a gap?
Like an area that hasn't really been completely covered and like discovered yet. And so it gives you a starting point.
Yes,
Build off of.
exactly, guys. So it's not okay to just report, right? You guys are used to, I know, because you're really good students, but we're still young, so you're only learning the process of writing and researching on like a smaller topic, right? So you're not giving a report on something when you go and present at a conference. Your job is to be able to say, here's a body of research, now here's what I'm proposing. You're proposing something new. And it's real hard. It would be hard for me if I were in your shoes to come up with that, because what do I know about science or aerospace, right? So as you're just starting, having it summarizing what's already existing for you and then giving you kind of an arrow pointing you in the direction of where the gaps are would be very, very helpful, especially if you've never done it before. So I suggest that one by far. Notice this one, editing for scholarly tone. Most of the times, I do a lot of that with you. You have to be careful with when you're editing for tone, because it will change your entire paper for you, especially if you're writing at like an 8th grade level, and then all of a sudden you're saying, I need this to sound like, a PhD person. So just be careful when using tone. You can see how it'll offer you suggestions, but here's the thing. If you already wrote like that normally, you would have written it like that. So you got to be careful, because I'm going to know instantly if that's your voice and the tone in that, okay? As you get more well-versed in writing, then your tone will sound more like that. You can also use it to search sources and check citations. Google Scholar, for example, we are familiar with, but Chat also has a Scholar version. So when you open up the ChatGPT page, there's a Scholar on the side. And so the Scholar works a lot like Google Scholar in that it will give you published and peer-reviewed sources that you might be able to use. The links don't always work. Remember, you got to check everything, right? There's no doubt that it's still just a tool, and a tool is only as effective as the person putting it to use, right? So you still have to make sure that the information is correct and that the links work and that they are not fake sources, because we do know that there have been instances where that has happened in the past, in many different fields. So here's an area, number 6. Those of you who have written papers before know that some of the hardest parts of that IAC abstract has to do with theory. You don't even know what theory is oftentimes, right? Or even things like future impacts in your conclusions or discussions. So use it for that. Ask it, what kind of theory could I apply to this topic? That way you learn more about the theories that exist. You don't need to wait for me to say, you don't have any theoretical applications here. You've already researched them on your own and you've understood those. And again, about the future impact. So understanding where that gap in the research is can help you figure out how your piece of research can contribute to future research as well. And then this is really important, and schools are now finally getting to this part. If you do use AI in some way, you've created an image, something along those lines, you have to cite it. And APA, MLA, all of them are now moving to this general acceptance that it's not going anywhere. So if students are going to use it like a tool, like a Google or like an article, then they need to at least acknowledge it. But here's a caveat, which means warning. Some conferences may end up saying they're not going to accept papers that have any AI. There are in some instances, like the end conference that I had to submit to this summer, had a little box that had to say that I had to acknowledge that I didn't use AI in the generation of my work. So we're getting to that point in society where you are going to be acknowledging and signing something for many, many instances, saying that you didn't, that all the work is yours, versus what we might have been able to get away with up to now. So just know, if you're going to use it, you've got to cite it in your works cited page or your reference page or underneath your images, image attributed to, right? So that you are not plagiarizing or being unethical. And if they say no, don't use it. And I've already talked about adjusting the level. And I've already kind of hit upon the fact that you're not cutting and pasting, you're always making the work your own. So that really is the majority of what I wanted to share with you today, except for this final little video tips about searching. And I want to kind of tell you what else is on here. This second one is, this first one is the one that I was saying that will have you open it up in Bing, and it's kind of seems pretty sophisticated. I haven't tried it yet, but it will allow you to like pull up those articles that you're reading or those journals, and then it will pull out like a side screen so that it can do all of the reading at once instead of you having to cut and paste it and putting it into a prompt. So just know that that's there. It's specifically about using it for scientific research. We're going to look at this one briefly together because it's not long, but then also how to cite for APA. There's a quick little video about how to do that as well. Again, and I'll share the slide deck out for those of you who attended today if you want to revisit it. But briefly, I thought I would share this one with you. Let me know if can you see the screen?
When I first tried ChatGPT, I thought it was completely overhyped. But as it turns out, I was just really bad at prompt writing. Now I use ChatGPT to help me with things like personal projects, essays, articles, content creation, resumes, cover letters, you name it. So here's my top 6 useful ChatGPT tips that'll help you massively improve your writing with the help of this little AI tool. Let's get into it. Tip number 1 is to use this basic prompt structure. Now, we want to avoid overly simplistic prompts, and the more specific you can be in your request, the better. And the way we can look at this is not to treat ChatGPT as this vending answer machine that you put tokens in and get answers spit out to you. Instead, we want to treat it as our personal assistant. So let me show you what I mean. So here's the basic prompt structure we want to use generally whenever we are creating a prompt. So first, we want to tell ChatGPT what action we want it to perform, whether that is to edit, to write, to critique. That's the first part of our basic prompt. we want to follow that up by telling it what format we want it to output in. So that could be an essay, bullet points, an outline, or something else. The third thing we want to do is give it a role or a style. And the last thing to include, depending on what you are asking of ChatGPT, is to provide the source if, say, you are getting it to edit or critique something.
So notice she's using pretty much the same tips that I am. It's in a different order. Either way, making sure that you have the basic structure for your prompt will guide you more as you're using it for the tool that you need.
So the 4 basic components of a good prompt are the action, the format, the role or style, and then the source that you want it to look at. So for example, write an outline for an article about growing an audience on TikTok, format it in bullet points, write as if you are a TikTok marketing expert. So the action here is to write an outline for an article about this topic on growing an audience on TikTok. The format, we want it in bullet points. The role or style is to write as if you are a TikTok marketing expert. And since we're not asking it to edit anything, we're not providing a source. So those 3 components are good. All right, so this is what ChatGPT spits out. So we have an introduction, create a strong profile. Okay, it's pretty long. I'm not going to go through all of it. But because we were specific in what we asked it for in our prompt, this is a lot more nuanced and specific to what we wanted compared to if we asked something more generic. Tip number 2 is to assign ChatGPT a tone, writing style, or a target audience, or a combination of these. So to do this, you would add to your prompt, write in X tone. So some ideas for tones you could ask it to write in are formal or casual, serious or friendly, optimistic or pessimistic, professional, scientific, concise, descriptive, persuasive, or informative. Depending on what kind of writing you're getting ChatGPT to do for you, some of these are going to work better than others. So if you're writing a paper or an essay, something like scientific or descriptive or informative might work really well. But if you're writing a blog post or an article, casual or friendly might be the better approach. So for example, explain how fractional reserve banking works, write in a friendly tone.
How am I already underwater?
Give
I'm
you
in the
little
same
ads
boat.
here.
I'm in an actual boat because I've been using Grammarly's
There
AI.
we go.
And ChatGPT is going to explain this in a simple and friendly manner. So fractional reserve banking is the way most banks works. It's a system that allows banks to lend out money.
This is that part where I was telling you it can help you understand more complex topics in terms that you'll grasp easier than trying to go through that whole body of research. Again, this is about understanding, not having it write for you, right? But how can you write something if you don't understand the topic? So that's really what I'm focusing on here with you.
More than actually having the reserves, but don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. So friendly and approachable manner right from the get-go. If you want to assign ChatGPT a writing style, here's some ideas. So to do this, you would add to your prompt, write in the style of a public figure. So basically you want to pick a public figure or well-known writer or speaker.
Right, and we won't be doing any of that, of course. So let's go on to the next one here, just for the sake of time.
X. So depending on what that's for, here's some ideas. So you could say to explain like I'm 5 or write to an audience of 5th graders. Write it for a university level economics class. Write it for high school students. Write it for busy moms. Write it.
Okay, so you get the point. It's basically everything we've covered, and just, you can go back and watch these on your own. I just wanted to let you know that these are the kind of accepted forms to be using. It all still comes down to, though, what you're using it for. So if you're going to use it for information, you're going to really need to work on honing your prompts. If you're going to use it for editing, also need to hone your prompts, upload your own material first, and be very careful to not just use what it kicks back as your work, to then see its ideas like side by side, and maybe you go in and change it up, but you're just giving some ideas. I know that seems like extra work, but that becomes the difference between your words and theirs. And so I'm going to close this part out for now and just go back to our slide. You guys still see my slide now where it says YouTube on the page? Cool. All right, so those links you'll get, and like I said, take some time to go through those. And this is just the kind of summary of where we are. And I really want you to kind of understand and walk away with the idea that you can be empowered to use it. Specifically for what we do here, I think the most important part is helping you understand some of the complex topics that you have. And please note that our policies, which are for us, would not supersede like the conferences. So if the conference told you that you couldn't use any, then you can't say, well, the wolf pack said we can, right? Like, just know you have to pay attention to the conferences. If you are unsure of what you are trying to do with it and you want to run it past us, you should. That would be smart. You know the old adage, if you've been on a Simmons trip, if you can't see him doing it, don't do it. Well, he uses AI too in order to understand some of the stuff that he's not using it to generate his stuff, but so there is a way that you can use it that's going to be helpful for you. If if you don't understand though, if the part that you're doing is ethical, then ask. It's better to ask than to make the mistake and find out later that we were like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like you. Right? So, and then again, ask yourself, am I generating new content that I intend to use on my own? And if that's the case, then don't do it. So that's really it for me. And I hope that that's kind of clear. I hope that you're going to be able to walk away today with some understanding, at least what our expectations are related to it, and how it might be useful for you. And I'm certainly happy to stay on. I can stop filming if you want some help, maybe putting in a topic of your own. I can stay with you for a few more minutes if you'd like just some practice generating. But other than that, any questions for me? Did you find this helpful at all?
Yes, yes, definitely.
Sophia, is it possible we may look at AI with maybe a little less, and say maybe there might be a role?
Maybe if it stops killing the planet.
I don't know about that. I don't know yet. But I do know that, it's I don't know that's the only thing that's doing it. We have a lot of things killing the planet, right? Humans
Yeah.
might be one of them too.
No, I'm sure, but I don't want to add
I'm
one more
teasing.
thing, you know?
I know. But you know what? Sometimes, Sophia, like when I'm really like nervous about something like that, I have to kind of throw myself into figuring it out so that I'm a little bit less fearful of what we have current. But yeah, for the future, I don't know. It's happening so fast. All right, folks, you don't have to stay on if you don't want to. I'll stay on for anybody who does want to practice, maybe like you're thinking about a topic for your abstract. Otherwise, thanks for attending.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna stop this recording here.